Vanessa didn't flinch when she looked her husband in the eye and delivered the words meant to crush him. "I'm sleeping with your best friend. If you can't handle it, leave." She expected Michael to explode, to beg, to fight, to fall apart the way any man would. But he didn't. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He didn't even blink. Instead, he gave her a calm, unsettling smile, the kind that hides storms, and whispered only 5 words that would change everything. What he did next didn't just silence her arrogance, it shattered her world. The living room was quiet, too quiet for a Saturday evening. Outside, the rain tapped against the wide glass windows, casting blurred streaks of city lights into the apartment. Michael sat at the dining table, still in his work shirt, sleeves rolled up, a half-empty glass of water in front of him. He had spent the whole week working late shifts, coming home exhausted, barely saying a word. He wasn't a loud man to begin with. Michael's strength was always in his silence. Vanessa paced the room, not out of nervousness, but impatience. She wore a silk robe over her fitted dress, lipstick perfectly done, as if she was about to head out. Her phone buzzed on the sofa. She glanced at it with a smirk before finally stopping in front of him. "Michael," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the room. He looked up, his eyes calm, unreadable. "Yes?" She folded her arms, chin tilted. Then she dropped it, like a weapon without flinching. "I'm sleeping with your best friend." The words hung in the air. No trembling voice, no shame, no hesitation, just cold arrogance. Michael blinked once. His hand tightened slightly around the glass, but he didn't smash it, didn't yell, didn't react like the man she expected to fall apart. Instead, he placed the glass down carefully on the table and leaned back in his chair. Vanessa watched him, almost annoyed that he wasn't breaking. "Did you hear me?" she pressed, tilting her head mockingly. "I said I'm sleeping with Richard. If you can't handle it, leave." Michael inhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling in perfect control. He should have shouted. He should have cursed. That's what Vanessa expected. Chaos, a fight, something dramatic she could hold over him later. Instead, his silence unnerved her. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, even, almost calm to the point of cruelty. "Is that so?" Vanessa blinked. What do you mean, is that so? Did you not hear what I said?" Michael's lips curled faintly, not quite a smile, but something that made her uneasy. "I heard you, Vanessa. Every word, loud and clear." The silence stretched again, but this time it was heavier. Vanessa shifted, trying to read him, but Michael's face was unreadable, like a stone wall. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "You don't look surprised," she said. "You don't even look angry." Michael tilted his head, his eyes dark and steady, locked on hers. "Should I be?" That unsettled her more than any shouting would have. She scoffed, masking her unease with arrogance. "I knew you were weak, Michael. Always so quiet. Always so boring. Richard knows how to make me feel alive. He gives me what you can't." Michael didn't flinch. He just leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, studying her like she was revealing more than she intended. "You know, Vanessa," he said softly, "it's interesting. You chose Richard of all people." Her brow furrowed slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Michael leaned back again, his tone almost casual. "Nothing. Just that life has a funny way of circling back." The clock ticked. The rain kept tapping against the glass, and for the first time, Vanessa felt something she hadn't in years around her husband: uncertainty. "You're not going to beg?" she asked finally, almost desperate for some reaction. Michael shook his head slowly. "No. You're not going to fight for me?" A pause, his eyes hardened, his voice cold. "Not anymore." Vanessa laughed nervously, stepping back. "You're pathetic." She grabbed her phone off the sofa, thumbs flying as she typed a message. Most likely to Richard. "You'll see. I don't need you. I never did." Michael stood slowly, his frame calm but commanding. He stepped close enough that she froze for a second, expecting violence. But instead he whispered near her ear, "If you think this ends the way you imagine, you're in for a surprise." He walked past her, heading to the bedroom without another glance. Vanessa stood frozen, gripping her phone tighter than she realized, her confidence cracking for the first time. The camera lingers on her face, confusion mixed with unease. Because for all her cruelty, she didn't expect indifference. She expected rage. In rage she could control. But silence, calm, that was something else, something dangerous. Michael didn't sleep that night. He lay awake staring at the ceiling while Vanessa scrolled endlessly on her phone beside him, laughing at messages she thought he couldn't see. Each chuckle, each soft vibration of her phone was like a dagger pressed against his patience. Yet he didn't speak. He simply turned his back to her, eyes wide open in the darkness. Long after she drifted into shallow sleep, Michael sat up quietly. He moved into his study, the one place Vanessa never cared to enter. She always mocked him for keeping it. Your little cave, she called it. But it was here, tucked away in drawers and files, that Michael's real life existed. Not the tired husband she thought she had broken, not the man she believed she could discard without consequence. He opened the drawer and pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside were documents, contracts, and letters with his name signed at the bottom. Hidden investments, carefully built over years, businesses Vanessa didn't even know existed. He ran his hand slowly across the papers, a calm weight settling in his chest. She thought she had stripped him of power. She had no idea she was the one about to lose everything. His mind wandered back to Richard. Once, years ago, Richard had been desperate. He remembered the night Richard came to him, shaking, begging for money to save his collapsing company. Michael had given it, no conditions, no judgment. At the time, he had called Richard brother, and Richard had called him savior. Now that same man was sleeping with his wife. Betrayal cut deep, but Michael's calmness came from something deeper than pain. He wasn't powerless. He had been preparing for storms like this long before Vanessa's arrogance. The following morning, Vanessa walked out of the bedroom in a fitted dress and heels, not even glancing at him as she adjusted her earrings. Don't wait up tonight, she said offhandedly, as if she were speaking to a house servant. Richard's taking me out. Michael folded his newspaper slowly, his eyes never leaving her. Is that so? She smirked, finally looking at him. Get used to it. He treats me the way you never could. He leaned back in his chair, voice calm as ever. Vanessa, you've always mistaken silence for weakness. She rolled her eyes, grabbing her purse. And you've always mistaken arrogance for strength. Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked out. The door slammed behind her, and Michael was left alone with the quiet hum of the apartment. He didn't chase her. He didn't plead. Instead, he reached into his briefcase, pulling out a sealed envelope, the one he had been keeping for months. He placed it on the table, staring at it with the same calm expression she had failed to understand. Outside, the sound of a car engine started. Michael walked to the window and watched as Vanessa climbed into Richard's car, laughing as she leaned over to kiss him. Richard looked up for a split second, and even through the tinted glass, Michael knew their eyes had met. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just watched. Because deep inside, he already knew. Richard owed him more than money. Richard owed him everything. And soon Vanessa would learn the cost of betting against a man who had nothing left to lose. Richard showed up later that evening, wearing the same smug grin Michael remembered from college days. He had the look of a man who believed he had already won. Designer suit, expensive cologne trailing behind him, confidence in every step as he strolled into the living room like he owned it. Vanessa followed closely, her hand brushing against his as they entered. She didn't bother hiding it. Michael was seated on the couch, flipping through a folder, as if the arrival of his wife and his best friend was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. He looked up once, his expression unreadable, then closed the folder with deliberate care and set it on the table. Michael, Richard said, voice overly casual. Long time, brother. Michael rose slowly, buttoning his shirt cuff as he approached. He extended his hand. Vanessa froze, expecting a punch, a scream, a violent outburst. But instead, Michael clasped Richard's hand firmly, holding it a second longer than necessary. His grip was steady, his gaze locked on Richard's eyes until the grin faltered just slightly. Richard, Michael said evenly, still standing. Richard laughed awkwardly, pulling his hand back. Always, my man. Always. He glanced at Vanessa, then back at Michael. You don't look surprised to see us. Michael poured himself a glass of water, his movements unhurried. Why would I be surprised? You've both been writing this script for a while. I've just been waiting for the final act. Vanessa's brows knit together. Don't start with your cryptic nonsense, Michael. You had your chance. You wasted it. Richard and I, we're done hiding. Michael sipped the water, then set the glass down with a soft clink. Good. Secrets only make things messy. The silence stretched. Richard shifted uneasily, unused to Michael's calm. He cleared his throat. Listen, man, I know this is awkward, but we don't have to make it ugly. Things change. People change. It's life. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. Life, yes. Funny thing about life, it has a way of circling back. Richard looked away, his confidence cracking just enough for Michael to notice. That tiny flicker was all he needed. He knew Richard's bravado was a mask, just like Vanessa's cruelty. Both of them were standing on fragile ground. Vanessa scoffed. This is pathetic. Look at you, Michael. No fight, no fire. Just empty words. You're nothing compared to him. She touched Richard's arm as if to underline her point. Richard is a real man. Michael leaned forward, his voice suddenly sharp enough to slice through the air. Richard is a man who still owes me. Richard's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? Michael didn't answer immediately. He let the silence hang, let the weight of his words settle in the room. Finally, he smiled faintly. You haven't forgotten, have you? Richard shifted uncomfortably. That was a long time ago. Michael's smile deepened. Some debts don't age. Vanessa looked between them, confusion crossing her face. What are you talking about? Richard forced a laugh, waving it off. Nothing. Just old times. Doesn't matter anymore. But Michael's gaze never left him, and Richard couldn't quite meet his eyes. The silence was louder than any accusation, and for the first time, Vanessa noticed the crack in Richard's confidence. Michael sat back down, picking up the folder again. Enjoy the evening, he said casually, flipping it open. But remember, Richard, some things come due when you least expect them. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but Richard grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. We'll talk later, he muttered, his voice strained. As the door closed behind them, Michael leaned back against the couch, his lips curling into a calm, knowing smile. He tapped the folder once with his finger, the sealed envelope tucked neatly inside. Because tonight, Richard had shown his fear, and fear was leverage. The next morning, Vanessa moved through the bedroom with a kind of triumphant energy. Sunlight spilled across the floor as she dragged her designer suitcases out from the closet, the wheels rattling against the polished wood. Each item she packed was a statement. Expensive heels, jewelry boxes, silk dresses, all reminders of the life Michael had worked to provide, yet one she claimed was never enough. Michael leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching her. There was no panic in his eyes, no plea for her to stop. Just a quiet, unshakable calm that unsettled her more than any argument could have. You're really doing this, he said finally. His tone wasn't disbelief, just observation. Vanessa tossed a handful of clothes into the suitcase and snapped it shut. Of course I am. Why wouldn't I? Richard has ambition. He knows how to make a woman feel valued. She glanced over her shoulder at him, smirking. Not like you. You hide in your silence and call it strength. But I see through you, Michael. You're weak. You always were. Michael stepped into the room, his voice even. Weak or patient? Vanessa scoffed, zipping another bag. Patient men die poor, Michael. Richard has plans. Richard has money. And he has me. You'll be left here, alone, forgotten, with nothing. Michael's eyes flicked to the jewelry box she had just packed. It contained a necklace he had given her on their 3rd anniversary, bought with money saved from working 3 jobs. He remembered how she had cried that night, telling him she'd never felt so loved. Now she tossed it into her luggage without hesitation, as though it were trash. You don't even care, she pressed as if his stillness was an insult. Most men would fight for their wives. You're just standing there watching me leave. Pathetic. Michael walked closer, his presence filling the space until she instinctively straightened, as though bracing for something. But instead of shouting, he bent down, closed the suitcase she had left open, and clicked the lock in place. If you want to leave, Vanessa, he said quietly, take everything. The clothes, the jewelry, the memories, take it all. I'll give you more than you asked for. The calmness in his voice unnerved her. She expected rage she could feed off, anger she could twist into guilt. But calm was dangerous. She frowned, masking her unease with arrogance. Don't try to scare me with your riddles. Richard is waiting outside. He knows how to take care of me. You'll never matter to anyone. Michael's expression didn't change. He leaned in just slightly, enough that she felt his breath near her ear. Life has a way of showing people exactly what they're worth. You'll see it soon enough. Her laugh was forced, brittle at the edges. She grabbed the last suitcase and wheeled it toward the door. Enjoy your empty house, Michael. You've earned it. Michael followed her to the doorway, his movements slow, deliberate. He opened the door for her like a courteous host, watching as Richard stepped forward to take the bags. The two lovers exchanged a smug glance, Vanessa clinging to Richard's arm as though she had already upgraded her life. Richard avoided Michael's eyes, though, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of his gaze. Michael noticed, and Vanessa noticed Michael noticing, but she couldn't quite place why it bothered her. Goodbye, Michael, she said, her tone sharp with triumph. Goodbye, he echoed, but the word carried no defeat, just a quiet certainty she couldn't understand. As the car pulled away, Vanessa waved from the passenger seat, a mockery of farewell. Michael stood in the doorway, silent, his hand brushing against the envelope hidden inside his jacket. Because Vanessa thought she was walking out of his life, but in truth, she was walking straight into his plan. Michael sat alone that evening, the echo of Vanessa's laughter fading as the taillights of Richard's car disappeared down the street. He poured himself another glass of water, sitting in silence, though his mind was anything but still. Memories rose unbidden, dragging him back through the years to moments he had almost forgotten, moments that now seemed sharper, clearer, as if they had been waiting for this exact day. He remembered their wedding night. Vanessa had been radiant, draped in lace and silk, her eyes shimmering not with love, but ambition. Michael had seen it then, though he buried it under hope. She had whispered to him under the golden lights, "Don't disappoint me." It wasn't a vow, wasn't a plea of affection. It was a command, a warning. And even then, Richard had been there, his best man smiling too wide, his hand lingering just a little too long on Vanessa's waist when they posed for photos. Another memory surfaced, 2 years later. Michael had been working nights, saving to buy them a modest apartment. One evening he came home early, only to find Vanessa laughing on the balcony with Richard. Their voices were low, intimate, but when Michael stepped into view, they pulled away quickly. Vanessa brushed it off, claiming Richard had only stopped by to check in. Michael had believed her, or rather, he had chosen to believe her. There was the Christmas party, too. Richard had shown up drunk, slinging his arm around Vanessa while Michael fetched drinks. She had laughed, not in protest, but with that same sharp glint in her eye, like she enjoyed testing boundaries, enjoyed watching Michael pretend not to see. Later that night, when Michael finally confronted her, she had snapped, "You're imagining things. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere for excitement." The words had cut deep. He had lain awake that night, staring at the ceiling just as he had the night before, realizing for the first time that silence could be a weapon. He hadn't shouted, hadn't fought. He had stored the memory away, let it harden into something cold and immovable. And now, as he sat in the dim light of his study, the weight of all those years pressed against him. Vanessa thought she was leaving him broken, but the truth was that she had been breaking the marriage piece by piece long before Richard ever touched her. Michael reached for the envelope again, holding it in his hands, feeling the weight of what was inside. It wasn't just paper, it was a line drawn in history, the point where patience ended and consequence began. Outside, a car slowed in front of the house. Michael glanced through the window. Richard's car, alone this time. The engine idled for a moment before shutting off, headlights cutting into darkness. Michael watched as Richard stepped out, looking over his shoulder as though afraid of being seen. His confident swagger was gone. He moved quickly, furtively, until he was knocking on Michael's door. Michael didn't rush. He walked slowly, deliberately, and opened the door. Richard stood there, shifting uneasily, his eyes darting around as though the shadows themselves were listening. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice tight, stripped of its earlier arrogance. Michael stepped aside, allowing him in without a word. The door shut, sealing them into the silence of the house that had once been full of Vanessa's sharp laughter. Richard swallowed hard, his hands buried in his pockets. "Look, I know how this must look, but I never meant for it to get this far. Vanessa, she's complicated." Michael's gaze was steady, unblinking. "You don't have to explain. I've known for a long time." Richard froze, caught off guard. You knew." Michael leaned against the wall, his arms folded. "I knew the night she told me you make her feel alive. What she doesn't know is that I've been watching you both for years. You were careless, Richard. Very careless." Richard's throat tightened, his eyes darting to the envelope on the table. "What's in there?" Michael's lips curved faintly. "Something that will remind you how much you still owe me." Richard stood frozen in the center of the room, his eyes fixed on the envelope lying on the table as if it might burst open on its own and expose him. The silence pressed down until his breath came uneven, a sheen of sweat appearing at his temple. Michael walked past him with deliberate calm, poured himself another glass of water, and finally spoke. "You remember that night, don't you?" Michael asked, his tone low, steady. "The night you came to me, shaking, begging for help." Richard flinched. "That was years ago. You said it was nothing. Between brothers." Michael turned, his glass in hand. "I said I wouldn't bring it up unless the time came." He set the glass down gently. "The time has come." Richard tried to laugh, but it came out strained, hollow. "Come on, Michael. You're not really going to hold that over me. We're friends. We've been through everything together. That money saved my company. Without it, I'd have lost everything." Michael's gaze sharpened. "And now you're trying to repay me by taking my wife." Richard's face flushed. He ran a hand through his hair, shifting his weight nervously. "Look, Vanessa, she made the move, okay? You know how she is. She's restless, demanding. You and I both know you couldn't keep up with her. I didn't plan for this. It just happened." Michael studied him for a long moment, then reached for the envelope. He held it loosely, almost casually, but Richard's eyes locked onto it with desperation. "Do you know what this is?" Michael asked. Richard swallowed hard. "What?" Michael opened the flap slowly, sliding out a set of signed documents. The rustle of paper was deafening in the quiet room. He placed them on the table, one by one. "It's the debt agreement you signed when you took my money. Do you remember the terms?" Richard's face drained of color. He took a hesitant step closer, eyes darting across the page. That was just formality. I said I wouldn't press it unless I needed to." Michael's voice cut clean, each word measured. "Well, Richard, I need to. And I will." Richard's jaw clenched. "What do you want from me?" Michael's expression never wavered. "For now, nothing. Just remember that I own a part of you, and if Vanessa thinks you're her golden ticket, she should know her future is tied to me." Richard's hands curled into fists, then relaxed, his mask cracking as panic set in. "You can't just—" Michael stepped forward, closing the space between them, his voice low enough to make Richard lean back. "I can, and I will, because unlike you, Richard, I don't gamble with what I can't afford to lose." The words hung in the air, heavier than the rain now pounding against the windows. Richard looked away, his confidence stripped, replaced by something raw, fear. He muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "She doesn't know." Michael tilted his head. "She will." Richard's eyes snapped back to him, wide. "No, you wouldn't." Michael smiled faintly, that same calm, unnerving smile Vanessa had faced the night before. Wouldn't I? The clock ticked loudly between them. Richard's breathing quickened, his eyes darting again to the papers on the table, as if searching for a way out, as if hoping the words might vanish on their own. But they didn't. The signature was there. His debt was real, and Michael had just turned it into a weapon. Richard's breath came in shallow bursts as he stared at the debt papers spread across the table. His mind raced with excuses, but each one collapsed under Michael's silence. He looked smaller now, stripped of his swagger, his suit suddenly feeling like a costume that no longer fit. Michael reached calmly into the envelope again. Richard stiffened, expecting more contracts, another reminder of his mistakes. But this time, Michael pulled out a different set of documents. Heavier, bound with a red ribbon, stamped officially. He laid them down slowly, one page at a time, his eyes never leaving Richard's face. "What's that?" Richard asked, his voice cracking despite his attempt to sound casual. Michael tapped the corner of the file. "Company filings, ownership records. Do you recognize the name here?" Richard leaned forward reluctantly, scanning the page. His stomach dropped when he saw it. The name of his company, the very empire he had built his new life on. And beneath it, underlined and clear, was another name, Michael's. "That's impossible," Richard muttered, shaking his head. You can't." Michael cut him off, his voice calm and cold. "When you came to me for help, I didn't just give you money. I bought equity, 40%, enough to watch, enough to control, and enough to bring everything you've built to its knees if I choose." Richard staggered back, his chest rising in shallow bursts. "Vanessa doesn't know." His voice trailed, panic blooming in his eyes. Michael stepped closer, his tone a low blade. "Not yet. But when she left this house clinging to you like you were her salvation, she had no idea she was stepping into my shadow. Every dinner you buy her, every dress she wears, every promise you whisper, it's all paid for with money tied to me. And when I pull the cord, she'll see the truth." Richard's voice broke, desperation spilling out. "Don't do this, Michael. Please. She'll leave me if she finds out." Michael tilted his head, his gaze unwavering. "Then you finally understand the position I've been in all these years. She left me long before she walked out the door. You've just been her latest game. The difference is, I play the long game." Richard tried to steady his breathing, tried to summon back the arrogance he'd walked in with. But it was gone. His mask had cracked, and Michael saw the man behind it, a man terrified of losing everything. Richard's phone buzzed suddenly in his pocket. He fumbled it out, Vanessa's name glowing across the screen. He glanced at Michael, frozen. Michael gestured calmly toward the phone. "Go ahead, answer her." Richard hesitated, then swiped the call. Vanessa's voice came sharp and impatient through the speaker. "Where are you? Why are you taking so long? Don't tell me you're still at Michael's." Richard's eyes darted to Michael, then back to the floor. His voice trembled as he forced a smile she couldn't see. "No, baby. Just finishing something up. I'll be there soon." Vanessa scoffed. "Hurry, don't keep me waiting." The line went dead. Richard slid the phone back into his pocket with shaking hands. Michael leaned closer, his voice low but cutting. "That's the problem with betrayal, Richard. The moment you think you've won, you're already losing." Richard stared at him, defeated, the weight of truth pressing down until he could barely breathe. Michael gathered the papers, sliding them neatly back into the envelope. He set it on the table with deliberate finality, then walked past Richard toward the window. Outside, the street was quiet, but Michael's reflection in the glass carried the calm of a man who held all the pieces. Richard remained standing in the middle of the room, broken, aware now that his power, his lover, his company, they all rested in Michael's hand. Michael didn't speak for a long while, his gaze fixed on the window as Richard stood in the silence, shifting uncomfortably. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of passing cars outside. Then, without turning, Michael said quietly, "Do you really think Vanessa chose you because of who you are?" Richard swallowed. "What are you getting at?" Michael turned back, his eyes steady, his tone almost clinical. "She doesn't love you, Richard. She never did. You're just the next rung on her ladder. When she thinks you've served your purpose, she'll toss you aside the same way she tossed me. You know that, don't you?" Richard's lips parted, but no words came out. His silence was enough of an answer. Michael reached for his briefcase on the side table. He set it on the couch, clicked it open, and pulled out a thick brown envelope. Not the one with the contracts, but a different one, heavier, sealed with tape. He slid it across the table toward Richard. Richard stared at it like it was a coiled snake. "What's this?" Michael sat down, folding his hands. "Open it." Richard hesitated, then tore the seal. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, Vanessa and Richard together in hotels and restaurants. In his car parked outside, places they thought were discreet. Each shot was crisp, time-stamped, undeniable. Beneath the stack of photos was a USB drive. Richard's face drained of color as he flipped through the evidence. His hands trembled, the images cutting deeper with every turn. How did you—" "I hired someone," Michael interrupted calmly. "Months ago, a private investigator. I suspected long before Vanessa had the courage to say it out loud. I wanted proof. Now I have it." Richard looked up, panic flashing across his face. "Why are you showing me this?" Michael leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Because I want you to understand something, Richard. I'm not playing defense. I'm playing offense. I've known for months what the two of you were doing. Every laugh, every kiss, every whispered word. I've documented it. I let it play out. Let Vanessa dig her hole deeper. And now," he tapped the pile of evidence, "now I own the narrative." Richard's throat worked as he tried to form words. You wouldn't go public with this. You'd ruin her." Michael's lips curved faintly. "And you. Don't forget yourself in the equation. Imagine what happens when you're bored. Your investors, your clients see these. Imagine your shiny empire tainted with scandal." Richard slumped into the chair, his hands running through his hair, the fight draining out of him. "Why are you doing this, Michael? Why not just let her go?" Michael's expression hardened, the calm mask slipping just enough for the steel beneath to show. "Because she didn't just leave me. She tried to humiliate me. She thought she could strip me of dignity, of manhood, and walk away unscathed. No, actions have consequences." Richard shook his head, voice hoarse. "You're not the man I remember." Michael's eyes didn't waver. "You never knew the man I was." The silence hung heavy again until Richard pushed the photos back across the table, his hands trembling. "What do you want from me?" Michael gathered the evidence calmly, slipping it back into the envelope. "For now, nothing. Just know that every step you take with Vanessa, I'll be right behind you. And when the time comes, I won't need to raise my voice. The truth will do it for me." Richard's phone buzzed again, Vanessa's name flashing across the screen. He let it ring this time, his hands frozen, sweat trickling down his temple. Michael leaned back, his calm smile returning. "You should answer her. She hates to be kept waiting." Richard didn't move. Vanessa twirled her wine glass lazily, her laughter echoing across the polished marble dining table in Richard's penthouse. The city glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and she basked in the reflection of her own ambition. Richard sat across from her, trying to match her smile, but his eyes were distant, the weight of Michael's words still pressing on him like a stone. "You see, Richard," Vanessa said, adjusting her diamond bracelet with a proud tilt of her chin. "This is how life should feel. Expensive wine, silk against my skin, no worries about bills or mediocrity. You've done for me in months what Michael couldn't do in years." Richard forced a chuckle, raising his glass. "Yeah, you deserve the best." Vanessa leaned closer, her voice honeyed with triumph. "We should make this official soon. You and me. Forget Michael. He'll fade into nothing. We'll be the power couple people talk about." Richard's fingers tightened around his glass. He nodded, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Michael's voice echoed in his head. "Every dinner you buy her, every dress she wears, every promise you whisper, it's all paid for with money tied to me." Vanessa didn't notice his unease. She was already imagining herself walking into corporate parties on Richard's arm, dazzling board members with her charm, finally being seen as the queen she always believed herself to be. In her mind, Michael was already a ghost, forgotten and irrelevant. But the truth was far from that. The very next day, Richard's phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, a board meeting, the quarterly review he had been dreading. Normally, he would face such meetings with ease, armed with numbers and charm. But now, with Michael's documents burned into his memory, he felt something he hadn't in years, fear. Vanessa noticed the tension as they dressed that morning. "Why so stiff?" she teased, slipping into a tailored dress. "Don't tell me you're nervous. You're Richard Stanton. You own the room." Richard's tie knotted awkwardly in his hands. He muttered, "Yeah, own the room." They arrived at the company's headquarters in a sleek black car. Vanessa's heels clicked confidently as she walked beside him, her smile wide enough for cameras that weren't even there. She loved these moments, the grand lobbies, the glass elevators, the polished chrome of wealth and power. It was the life she always believed she deserved. As they stepped into the boardroom, Vanessa's smile grew brighter. She saw the long, polished table, the men and women in tailored suits, the air thick with authority. She imagined herself already belonging here, the woman behind the man in charge. She placed a hand on Richard's arm and whispered, "This is our world now." But as she scanned the room, her gaze froze. At the head of the table, in the chairman's seat, sat Michael. Calm, composed, eyes steady. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. Her triumphant smile faltered, her grip tightening on Richard's arm. What is he doing here?" she whispered, her voice sharp with sudden panic. Richard couldn't answer. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He knew, even before Michael spoke, that the ground beneath him was about to give way. Michael looked directly at Vanessa, then at Richard. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone filled the room with an authority that neither of them had expected. "Shall we begin?" Michael said evenly, gesturing toward the empty seats. Vanessa lowered herself into a chair slowly, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. For the first time since leaving her husband, she felt something she thought she'd buried forever: fear. The boardroom air was thick with expectation, executives murmuring quietly, laptops open, pens ready. Vanessa sat stiffly beside Richard, her perfect smile plastered on like armor, though her fingers trembled slightly as they clutched her handbag. Michael sat at the head of the table, composed, his calm presence making the entire room lean toward him without effort. One of the directors cleared his throat. "Shall we begin with the chairman's report?" Michael nodded, folding his hands on the polished wood surface. "Yes, let's begin." Vanessa's eyes darted around the table in disbelief. Chairman? Michael? No, it wasn't possible. She leaned closer to Richard, whispering sharply, "Why is he here? What's going on?" Richard's face was pale. He tugged at his collar, avoiding her gaze. I thought he..." His words trailed into silence, his confidence shattered. Michael's gaze shifted to them briefly, a flicker of amusement crossing his eyes. Then he addressed the room with measured precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, I won't take too much of your time. Today's meeting is not about projections or strategies. It's about clarity. It's about ownership." The directors murmured among themselves. Vanessa's nails dug into Richard's arm. "Ownership? What is he talking about?" Michael reached into his leather briefcase, pulling out the same envelope that had haunted Richard the night before. He spread the documents across the table, each page sliding into place with a deliberate hand. "Years ago, when this company was on the verge of collapse, Richard Stanton came to me for help. I invested quietly. I took equity. I stayed in the shadows because I believed in him and I believed in loyalty. But loyalty," his eyes fixed firmly on Richard, "is a currency some people don't understand." The directors leaned forward, scanning the documents. One of them adjusted his glasses. "These signatures are legitimate. 40% stake. Michael Cole?" He looked up sharply. "That makes you..." "The largest shareholder," Michael finished smoothly, "and by default, chairman of this board." A stunned silence filled the room. Vanessa's mouth fell open, words catching in her throat. She turned to Richard, her whisper a sharp hiss. You told me you owned everything. You told me this was yours. Richard avoided her eyes, shame flooding his features. Michael let the silence linger before continuing, his voice calm but carrying the weight of iron. I stayed silent while Richard rebuilt. I let him wear the crown, let him play the king. But when a man betrays trust, when he takes not only your money but your family, silence ends. The room was spellbound. Executives who once only knew Michael as Richard's quiet friend now saw the truth. A man who had been pulling strings from the shadows. Vanessa tried to regain her composure. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with scorn. So what? You've been hiding behind paperwork. That doesn't make you powerful. It makes you pathetic. Michael's gaze landed on her, calm and cutting. Vanessa, you've always confused arrogance for strength. That mistake brought you here, into this room, sitting beside a man who never truly owned what he promised you. Her face flushed crimson, but Michael didn't let the silence save her. He tapped the documents with one finger. Every dollar he spent on you, every luxury you paraded in, every dinner, every bracelet, it all came from here. And here, he gestured to himself, is me. Vanessa's breath caught. Her confidence wavered, her world tilting as the realization sank in. The wealth she thought she had secured through betrayal was nothing more than borrowed pride, borrowed from the very man she mocked and discarded. Richard buried his face in his hands, the facade of the confident businessman collapsing before the eyes of his peers. Michael leaned back, his voice soft, but slicing through the silence. This is not the fall, Richard. This is only the beginning. Vanessa sat frozen, humiliated, her dreams unraveling with each word. For the first time since the affair began, she felt cornered, and for the first time in years, Michael held the ground. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating, every eye locked on Michael. The weight of his revelation pressed on the walls themselves, as if even the glass and steel of the high-rise tower understood something irreversible had just been set in motion. Vanessa sat rigid in her chair, her carefully crafted poise slipping away. Her hands trembled under the table as she tried to force her expression into one of defiance, but the color in her cheeks betrayed her. Richard hunched forward, his shoulders heavy, sweat beading across his forehead. Michael rose slowly, collecting the scattered documents with meticulous care. The room followed him with their eyes, captivated as he pulled a second envelope from his briefcase, sleeker, thinner, but somehow heavier than the first. He laid it flat on the table, his hand resting on it as he looked directly at Vanessa. Marriage, he said quietly, though the room was so silent that every syllable carried. It's built on trust, on faith, on loyalty. When those are gone, all that remains are signatures. Vanessa's eyes widened as he slid the envelope across the polished table toward her. What is this? She asked, though her voice faltered. Michael's gaze never wavered. Divorce papers, signed, dated, final. A ripple moved through the room, murmurs of shock from the board members who had just witnessed the collapse of business mass now colliding with personal ruin. Vanessa's hand hovered above the envelope, but she couldn't bring herself to touch it. You planned this? She whispered, her arrogance cracking into disbelief. Michael nodded once, calm and deliberate. The night you thought you were shattering me, Vanessa, I was already free. I didn't yell because I didn't need to. I didn't fight for you because you were never mine to lose. You chose Richard, and now you live with that choice. Her voice sharpened, desperate, clinging to the last scraps of control. You can't just throw me away like this. Michael leaned forward, cutting her off, his tone low but carrying the weight of finality. You threw yourself away the day you came home and looked me in the eye to say you were sleeping with him. Those words weren't just betrayal. They were your signature on these papers. All I did was write the date. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her hand shook as she finally touched the envelope, her fingers brushing against the legal weight of her downfall. Richard shifted beside her, his voice a hoarse whisper. Vanessa. But she yanked her hand back, glaring at him with venom. Michael straightened, looking at both of them with that same unnerving calm. This is where you thought you had won. You left me thinking you'd found something better. But what you built was on sand, and now the tide has come in. The board members avoided eye contact, some whispering, others sitting in stunned silence. They weren't just watching the end of a marriage, they were watching a woman's arrogance stripped bare and a man's empire collapse in tandem. Vanessa clutched her handbag like a shield, her eyes darting around the table, searching for an ally. But none of the powerful faces around her offered rescue, not one. They only watched, and in that silence, she felt smaller than she ever had in her life. Michael gathered the last of his papers, sliding them neatly back into his briefcase. He paused only once more, his voice soft but merciless. You thought betrayal would define me, Vanessa, but in truth it defined you. And this, he gestured to the envelope before her, is the legacy you chose. He turned toward the door, the echo of his footsteps filling the room like a gavel striking down. Vanessa remained frozen, her chest heaving, her world crashing into shards around her. The boardroom emptied slowly, executives slipping out with hushed whispers, their eyes flicking back one last time to the wreckage of pride left at the table. The once laughing, untouchable Vanessa sat with her head bowed, her manicured hands clutching the divorce envelope as if it were a live wire burning her palms. Richard slumped beside her, shoulders caved in, his face drenched in sweat and shame. The silence was unbearable. Vanessa finally snapped, her voice breaking into the empty space. Michael, wait! Her heels clicked as she stumbled after him, no longer the poised woman who had flaunted her betrayal, but a trembling figure stripped of her grandeur. She caught up to him just outside the double doors, her eyes wide, tears streaking her makeup. You can't do this, she pleaded, her voice raw. You can't just walk away and leave me like this. I made a mistake. I was angry, foolish. Please, Michael, don't let it end like this. Michael turned slowly, his gaze steady, unreadable. For a moment she thought she saw the softness of the man she once married, the man who had loved her so fiercely he sacrificed his dreams for hers. But then it vanished, replaced by the calm, iron edge she no longer recognized. You shattered it yourself, he said simply. The night you chose Richard over respect, over loyalty, you burned the bridge. All I'm doing is walking away from the ashes. Vanessa's knees buckled. She sank to the floor right there in the corridor, sobbing, clutching at the hem of his jacket. Please, don't leave me like this. I'll do anything. I'll change. Michael stepped back, removing her grip with quiet precision. Vanessa, you always thought love was power. You never understood it was sacrifice. And now you're left with nothing but the power you tried to steal. Behind them, Richard appeared in the doorway, his face twisted with fear and exhaustion. Vanessa turned to him instantly, desperation flaring. Richard, help me. Tell him you'll fix this. Tell him we can make it right. But Richard shook his head slowly, the mask finally gone. His voice was hoarse, hollow. I can't, Vanessa. Without him, I have nothing. His eyes dropped to the floor, shame pulling him away. He turned and walked back into the boardroom, leaving her crumpled on the marble tiles. The sound of her sobs echoed down the long hallway as Michael adjusted his cufflinks, his posture tall, unshaken. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The power had already shifted, and there was nothing left to prove. He stepped into the waiting elevator, the doors closing in slow silence. For a moment, his reflection stared back at him, calm, composed, victorious not through vengeance, but through control. Vanessa fell on her knees in the empty corridor, her cries echoing through the hollow space, shattered by the very man she once mocked as powerless.